All right, welcome everybody. This is the January 2021, can you believe it, Data and Performance Management Committee meeting. If you haven't already, please enter your name in the agency chat box so we know who is participating. Also for you that may or may not have attended this meeting before, this format is a little more discussion. So if you haven't already, please either dial in, or if you have a microphone on your computer, that's fine, but we would like to hear from you throughout the meeting, so feel free to participate as you can. So let me share my screen. Okay. So today we're going to talk about COVID-19 and the impact on data. So I have some data to share with you, and then I'd also like to hear from this group. And then we will dive into the emergency shelter project performance reports. Okay, so what I did for looking at the impact from COVID-19 is I pulled out some of the measures from the system performance report to kind of show you where we stand. And so the system performance report is pulled from October 1st through September 31st of each year. And so the column in blue represents the data from the most recent reporting period, which is 10/1/19 through 9/30/20. So this first one is looking at the client's length of stay in either emergency shelter, safe haven, or transitional housing projects. And you can see how our performance has been over the past 6 years. Since 2018, we've had a slight increase in length of stay, but overall we're staying pretty consistent over the past 6 years, which is great. It means that we're maintaining our performance. We're not, as you'll see, we're adding more clients, but our performance is still staying the same. So that means that we're able to maintain the work that we're doing. Also, all of this data, or the data in the blue columns, is considered draft at this point. We have not submitted the data to HUD yet. So also keep that in mind as we go through this. Once the data is submitted to HUD for this past reporting period, we will do a full report of all the measures and share that with everyone. So the next measure that we looked at is returns to homelessness. So this is looking at any clients that exited a project to a permanent housing location and then later returned to the homeless system in HMIS. So the project exits are from either street outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, or a permanent housing project. And then they exited those projects to permanent housing, and then they came back again. So you can see, again, we've had some small increases year over year since 2017, but overall we're staying fairly close in the same range. And when we do the final system performance report, we will break this down by project type, and you'll see that some are more consistent than others. I think it was street outreach and emergency shelter that have had the biggest returns to homelessness, whereas permanent housing and transitional housing have less variance.
Hey, Erin, this is Jackie. I have a question on that. Sorry.
Sure.
How does the FEMA project affect these? Because they're considered shelters, and a lot of the clients were put in shelter, and then when that project ended, for example, like Project Room Key portions, some of them went back to homelessness. So is that data added into here, or is it
so
not?
So the FEMA projects are considered emergency shelters, but those clients aren't necessarily reflected on this chart because, so let's say they're in your regular emergency shelter, they're in Ontario. and they had to go to a non-congregate shelter because they were either high risk or they tested positive.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the projects were keeping the Terrio, in this case, enrollment open
Yes.
while they were in the congregate shelter. And then when they left the non-congregate shelter, they were coming back to your project. So there is no exit from Terrio, so that wouldn't show up here. And then the non-congregate shelter, the exit would be to emergency shelter. So that's not a permanent housing exit. So those clients also wouldn't show up here.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I was just thinking about like our, for example, the non-congregate shelters where we took in the street homeless clients and temporarily put them into a shelter, quote unquote. And then when that project ended because the funding ended, is that included into here? Because some of them ended up not going back to a shelter. Some of them just ended up leaving or, you know, going back to where they were before the county closed the project.
So if the exits from the non-congregate shelter would show up on the successful exits measure, which is towards the end that I'll show you, but they will not show up on this one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this next measure is looking at unduplicated clients that are either in emergency shelter, transitional housing, or safe havens. And you can see here also, since 2017, we've been steadily increasing the number of clients in these projects. And that's due to, we just keep on getting funding, which is great. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's reflecting the additional clients that we're able to serve with the additional funding that we're receiving. And so this next measure is looking at clients who have become homeless for the first time, at least in terms of HMIS. And it's looking at any clients in emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, or permanent housing projects. And this one's a little bit all over the place, but we actually had a decrease from the previous year. And that could reflect the instability of the past year. And I kind of lost my train of thought. It could reflect that clients that were previously homeless were housed and then they had to return to homelessness again due to the conditions in the past year, which also would be reflected in the increased returns to homelessness. It could also be due to projects had to alter how they are reaching out to clients and finding new clients due to the conditions from the previous year. Oh, I thought I saw a comment, but I did not. All right, so now we'll look at exits like Jackie mentioned earlier. So this first one is the percentage of clients that exited a street outreach project to a successful destination. So this includes, a successful destination includes any permanent housing projects as well as linkages to other projects. So an emergency shelter, transitional housing would also be considered successful exits from street outreach. Mostly any destination that is not an unknown destination, the streets or jail is considered a successful exit from street outreach. And we did great this past year. I'm gonna look and see if there's any street outreach providers on the call today that have input on that, and if you've seen changes in the past year that would cause increases, or maybe it's also due to serving less clients and therefore it's your positive exits are increasing.
I think there's just a little bit more available shelter. And I think we've like you know, there's a little bit more room to grow those relationships too with Shelter, since we've been getting more online. That's probably why. I think it's just more availability. I think also as one of like the the larger street outreach projects or agencies, us having access to the Armory kind of as our own shelter too has probably helped, as far as like relationship wise. But that's probably why. I think we just have a lot more availability and, a lot smoother of a process and better relationships as, time goes on.
And do you have, Cassie, did you find that you were able to serve less clients this previous year? Did your caseload get impacted at all by COVID?
For outreach, I mean, no, not really. I think we have been pretty stable. Obviously, like, I think everybody's shelter beds kind of did go down, but that said, I think that there's, still more shelters that are open this year than in the past. I think there's just a lot more funding too, like you said, that's available for us to get, more groups out and touch more people. We've definitely picked up a lot more funding. Is this this also might have to do with like Project Tool Belt as well, right?
Yes, for sure.
So that's a huge chunk of it, I'm sure.
Okay.
Because that was a lot of funding. That was a lot of people that were touched.
Yeah.
I agree. I think Project Tool Belt, I mean, in our eyes, we at one point housed in the different non-congregate hotels that the county funded for the homeless was about 600 at one given time.
Yeah, it was
during
a lot of people.
during the months of March through April through December. So that definitely can be why there's a huge increase. And I think part of it is we don't want that with this year. I mean, as we start out this coming fiscal year or this funding year, we need to put that into perspective though, as a team, that our numbers may dramatically drop. Even though we do have more beds, it may not be at the 40% because we don't have as many of the 800 beds like we did this past year for the COVID projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sierra is also kind of saying the same thing, that they've been using emergency housing assistance to house people due to the pandemic. Yeah, so. Any other thoughts, comments on this measure before we keep going?
I would also just add that we've had an increase in the amount of PSH resources available to street outreach clients at this time. So we've built connections and more of a streamlined process between our South County operations and expansions of PSH in Central and North County. So that might be affecting it, just my 2 cents.
Okay, great. All right. This next measure is looking at successful exits from emergency shelters, street or safe havens, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing projects. So Jackie, this is where we're seeing a little bit of a drop in the number of successful exits. If clients are exiting these non-congregate or FEMA projects and they're going back to the emergency shelter they were at before, or if they're going to the streets, that would cause this percentage to go down. The good news is it doesn't appear that it's hurting us too much. We're mostly staying pretty level. It's gone down a little bit, but it could have been a lot worse, especially with the number of clients that you mentioned that are being served. And the last measure I wanted to share with the group is retention of or exit to permanent housing from permanent supportive housing or other permanent housing projects. So what this is looking at is, so the universe is clients in permanent supportive housing or other permanent housing projects. If they remained active in the project as of the end of the reporting period and they had a housing move-in date, that's considered a positive result. Or if they exited during the reporting period to permanent housing, that is also considered a positive result. So that's why we do so well on this measure, is because the purpose of permanent supportive housing and other permanent housing projects is to keep people in those projects. So it's a fairly easy measure for us to meet, and you can see that reflected here. It's very high for us. So before we move on to the discussion part, did anybody want to comment or ask questions on any of these measures? All right, so I do have some questions that I want to talk with the group about. I also put together a little poll to kind of jumpstart the discussion. I meant to go one question at a time, but it didn't work out that way. So I'm going to launch the poll here in a second. There are 7 questions, and I'll give everybody a chance to answer those, and then we can kind of go through them, each one. Are you able to see the polls?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, some results are starting to come in, so I'll give everybody another 30 seconds. All right. If you're finishing up your last one, please do so really quick, and then I'm going to close it down. Okay. So hopefully you are able to see the poll results. So we'll just kind of work through some of these. The first question was, have you noticed a change in your agency's data quality, performance, or demographic data due to COVID-19? And 3 of you said yes. So any of those 3, if you're willing, could you share what changes you've noticed?
Just in terms of pure incomes and outputs and everything else that's gone on with obviously running large scale emergency shelters during COVID-19, we have seen dramatic dips in the number of clients entering into our facilities, and of course impacting client exits. So we've seen this mostly and most notably at the shelter level, but other programs are relatively on track where they would be on a normal year. So it's mostly those programs that are interacting with the public and large scale emergency shelters that are most notably impacted.
But the population that you're serving has mostly stayed the same?
I was alluding to the performance aspect of the question.
Okay. Anybody else like to share how your data quality, performance, or demographic data has changed?
Yeah, as far as performance here at Friendship Shelter, pretty much the same as what was just said. We had to decrease capacity at one of our shelters because we just can't fit as many people in that room anymore. So we serve less people. We've seen length of stay go up. We've also seen that people, and this could have been a trend continuing from the year before, so it's hard to say, but we're tending to, when people exit to permanent housing, it's more frequently a subsidized location than unsubsidized, and that wasn't always the case. It used to be about 50-50. So it seems like unsubsidized, like people moving to a room for rent is definitely on the decline as far as our shelters are concerned. For demographic data, we haven't noticed any radical changes, but we also haven't really been looking closely.
Okay. And for the increase in subsidized exits, is that due to a change that you're making or just more opportunity?
You know, it could, certainly more opportunity is available. I also think it could have something to do, because there's more opportunity by Project Toolbelt, which we're doing that in South Spa. So if I look at all the programs combined, that's clearly what's happening. But like our bridge housing program used to place 60 to 70% of its people in rooms for rent or some kind of unsubsidized housing. And now it's down to like 35%, which is a huge change. I think part of it could be a change in the demographic of people that we are serving, not due to COVID-19, but due to having different grants and funding streams and referral origination sites because of that. So I think there could be a lot more factors at play there than just COVID-19, but I mean, it's been a monumental upheaval in just where people are exiting to as far as permanent housing.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. The next question, has your agency changed the way data is communicated in the past year? 3 of you said yes to that also. I'd be interested to hear more on how your data communication has changed.
I can go again, or Cassie, you unmuted yourself. Do it.
No, I was actually going to say, this actually has a little bit like, this is kind of a loaded question for us because I came into the agency during the year, so a lot of stuff has changed. Yeah, I mean, it's not fair of me to really answer this question because CityNet literally didn't have anything before this, so.
How, this kind of goes into the next question, but how are you communicating your data now?
I mean, we actually have a team and we're I mean, as you know, I can share with the group, but like we're changing a lot of things data-wise, so within the agency. So there has been a lot more, you know, we're kind of amping up or ramping up our trainings and communication as far as like what's expected and you know, how we've been performing as of late, and you know, from what we can tell. And so it's, like I said, it's kind of not fair of me to answer this question in a response to like COVID things, because it's not necessarily relevant, I guess. It's more relevant to just changing the agency as a whole. But yeah, we have a team now, so, and there's actually people working on it. So
It's always a good thing.
yeah, so there's that. Connor, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of similar over here, although I didn't get hired this year at this agency. I've been responsible for this data for a long time. But the data at Friendship Shelter has changed. We did hire one other person to work on the data team. So that's been a change. And what that has enabled us to do is, like, I used to, this is kind of spilling into the third question, but I'm going to go for it. I used to distribute whatever, like PDFs internally of, you know, our current performance to each of the program managers so they could be aware of how they're performing, stuff like that. And now I've kind of consolidated everything into one big interactive dashboard that our employees and program managers can access. And it actually goes back throughout all of history, so they can see our performance all the way back to the beginning of time in HMIS, which I think is a nifty feature. So we've moved away from like a print and static format and towards an interactive format. And we also internally are using a dashboard that shows performance metrics disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, disability status, and we're using that to kind of analyze whether we're reaching equitable outcomes. So those have both been two, we were doing that before, but again, on paper. So that's been the biggest shift, is using like an interactive format.
And so you said this is for demographic and performance data, and it's all projects at your agency?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it looks like the ones you guys were making in Power BI for the program performance, but it has all of our programs by program type and program performance metrics in one dashboard. It's kind of hideous, if I'm being honest, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, there's always the balance between how much you want to share and what people are going to understand.
Yeah, this thing has like, it's showing probably 250 different performance metrics in like a little 10 by 10 square. I describe it as being like a mullet, business up front and party in the back.
All right, great. Does anybody else have anything to share about how your agency is communicating data?
This is Jackie. So Illumination Foundation doesn't only use the data that's collected in HMIS, but we do have our own internal like EMR system, electronic medical record system, that we pull data from for all of our clients. And we use Tableau a lot. We have Tableau licenses to create dashboards. And kind of like what Connor was saying is, it's hard, or what you were saying, it's hard to present the data for them to understand. So it's like, okay, here's a pretty picture, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the back end of it. And then it's just presenting what is more meaningful to them as an agency or as the staff. We've always goaled all of our data to the staff and letting them know that it's highlighting the work that they're doing. And if the outcomes are great, the better the chances we get funded again. And so that's just the way we communicate our data to the working staff. And we have a few members that work on those on a regular basis. It's updated regularly so that we can continue to show that and highlight to the staff that their work does mean something and that the data shows it.
Okay, great. All right, so that kind of leads into the next question, asking how your agency is informed about about the work going on with other projects or departments at your agency. 6 of you said emails or newsletters, and 7 said team meetings. And those are multiple choice, so it could have been, there could be some overlap there. And we kind of already talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to ask the group what kind of information is being shared in these emails or newsletters or during these meetings. Is it just like performance and demographics data like Connor mentioned, or kind of like what Jackie mentioned? Are there more like narratives, or what are you sharing about your projects?
At Mercy House, we use multiple mediums to communicate data to other departments and especially to our program staff. We have an agency-wide meeting that is held now over Zoom, and I have the joy and honor of rattling off statistics. We also do communicate performance evaluations to specific team meetings and trickle down from the executive level. We discuss performance and outcomes at the executive level, and then discuss and provide that information to our various program staff through that hierarchy.
Anybody else want to share? Or is there anything that you would want to be able to share with your agency data-wise that you can't do now?
I'd say it's not that we can't do it, like it can be done. We're just not doing it and too busy to do it. So in that sense, we can't. But kind of like John Bryan from Mercy House was saying, we rely a bit on like the Reaganomics trickle down of data and performance. So we communicate pretty heavily to the executive team and program managers and leadership, but it doesn't necessarily make it all the way down. So the data team here would really love to be able to meet more one-on-one with the actual frontline staff and communicate data, more than anything, data successes to the people working on the front line. I feel like it doesn't make it there as much as we would want it to. But we just don't have the labor hours available to undertake that project right now.
Do those frontline workers have HMIS access?
All frontline workers here have HMIS access. You know that.
Good answer. Do they ever look at like the dashboard that is on when they log in?
You know, I got to be honest with you, Aaron. I think I opened a ticket about it maybe a couple years ago when we switched to Clarity. Our dashboard includes, I think it includes Mercy House and American Family Housing. So it's not actually very useful for us and has been at several points quite confusing to frontline staff. They're like, we served 7,000 people, and I'm like,
I thought we added a filter for that, so that wouldn't, so you could filter those out.
I don't know. We might have, and then it might have stopped working or something. But when I'm logging into Clarity right now, this might be something we can do on a ticket after the meeting. But yeah. I'm pretty sure that it still includes data that is not ours.
Okay.
I would also say that we see the same things through our partnership programs. So I think that's just because in the interest of keeping things transparent among the partnerships that we have that feature built in. I know we see things for AFH, Friendship Shelter as well. So I think it's just because of the HHOC partnership we're in that it's structured that way. I'm not sure how deliberate that was, but I can check with Allison Davenport.
Okay, so assuming that the dashboard was only showing your agency's data, is that the kind of information that you would want your frontline staff to see, or are there other things?
I would be, so I'm looking at the dashboard right now. It definitely is not only showing our agency's data. And I would like to see a dashboard that has more, I think more directly communicates what frontline staff are doing, whereas this seems pretty focused on demographics and categorization, which I don't think is meaningful to frontline staff. Frontline staff aren't going to really dig into like what's the age or gender distribution. Not that that stuff's not important, but if they hear like, hey, we increased this many people's income and this many people exited to permanent housing and they're staying housed, even like, you know, it's in here, it's already a secure system. If you could put up like the name of the person who was most recently housed by the agency, just spitballing, you know, that might really make someone happy, which I think is the point of trying to communicate this to the frontline staff.
Okay, is that something that everybody else, if would you all like to see that too? Like John Smith exited to permanent housing this week, or you know, something like that, so you have more context for the clients that you're serving? We got a couple yeses in the chat. Okay.
And yeah, I want to say too, I see, Casey, your message that we can filter by agency, and I do see that. I think that for, you know, me, Nirav, Mia, kind of people who live in HMIS, we understand that, but like the typical frontline staff worker who just uses HMIS to add services or do an enrollment for a client probably isn't gonna know how to or really care to navigate to put in the name of an agency. Whereas if it was just a landing page, I think it could be more impactful, although that may not necessarily be possible with the way we've set up data sharing in Looker.
Okay, that's helpful though. We can go back and look at the dashboard and with kind of that mindset for the frontline workers. All right. Is your agency interested in transitioning to live data entry? I'm kind of surprised nobody said no, if I'm being honest. So 5 of you, a little over half, said yes, you are interested, and the rest said don't know. So for those of you that are, what are kind of the barriers for you in transitioning to live data entry? Or there's no barriers and you're just doing it to it? Oh, Cassie, here we go.
No, I was gonna say I'm gonna exclude myself again from this because we basically are.
Okay.
So kind of the next question. So we are, for the most part, doing things on the spot, and we will be even more so in the next coming weeks. You know, again, as you know, there's some things that we are working on in the background to get City Net kind of up and running in the correct way. So I think like street outreach especially should be live. So there's maybe just a couple, you know, maybe I'm even assuming that our shelter programs, I think also like, and I know this was a thing with Mercy House, and it's different with CityNet, is that Mercy House isn't equipped with, you know, the hardware, you know, like they don't have computers and tablets, and like not everybody has a laptop, that type of thing. And whereas at CityNet, we've budgeted for that, and that all of us have laptops and all of us have cell phones. And so I think it's just an agency to agency thing on like how difficult that is. I mean, I know it was really, really difficult at Mercy House to like even think about doing that for some of our projects. You know, again, I think it's a overhaul of the budgeting for the agency to like have those funds accessible. And you know, again, it's like, and just kind of the size of your agency too, like, and like starting that, like, again, like Mercy House probably has like 400, you know, staff, you know, whereas like some of these smaller agencies might be able to do it. So I mean, that's my experience being in two like very large agencies, and the difference. So sorry if you guys can all hear my dog whining in the background. That's all.
Sierra is agreeing with you, Cassie. And John Paul, I saw you unmute for a second. Did you want to add anything?
Yes. So everything Cassie just said is accurate. For instance, I think there are areas in our agency where we could have room to expand to live data entry. And as she said, street outreach is one of those. There are other aspects of our operations, though, that just would seriously, I feel, disrupt our workflow. So I'm not sure if there is an option to do it piecemeal. And I think persuading our executive team, I think that'd be an integral part of persuading them to go to live data entry, just so it's not a massive overhaul of our agency's workflow processes.
Yeah, it's definitely, definitely doesn't have to be all or nothing. So yes, if you want to move forward, maybe with your street outreach projects, or even just one as a pilot, that's definitely an option. Don't feel like you have to get it all going at one time.
Yeah, for
Thank you.
Elimination Foundation, I think it's in the same boat as Mercy House. There's just so many staff members. And as Casey was saying, accessibility to software or to computers right then and there live as they're doing it. I mean, our agency is partly doing live data entry in some aspects. And then there's some aspects where it might have to wait half a day until they get through all their intakes, depending on how many clients they have new coming into the shelter. So yeah, it's definitely a barrier. I think some of our executives do agree and some don't agree with that, because it might take away from quality of care or getting to know the client, is their fear sometimes if we're staring at a computer as we're doing an intake on the staff level. So we've tried to push it as much as possible to do within the first 24 hours, making sure that stuff is entered so that it's accurate and concise, but we can only control so much when it comes to intakes and the time it takes to do them.
Great. Oh, was that Connor? I just saw somebody unmute, or Elizabeth. And Connor. Elizabeth first.
I just wanted to agree with Jackie about the computers. I think we've had this in some of our experience where our clients prefer us kind of in intake giving them more eye contact and kind of be present. So, and sometimes they don't feel comfortable with us having the phone or the computer doing the intake because they get a little paranoid, but also similar to what everyone's been saying, that we don't have the equipment for all of our staff, especially this year with a lot of new startups. We didn't have enough computers for everyone, so we had to kind of do the paper forms and enter it later on once we had access to computers or we had to share computers.
Okay. Connor?
Yeah. This has been a project of ours for the past couple of years. We've been making this transition. We're down to just our permanent supportive housing programs are still using primarily paper. And what I mean by that is we've definitely not gone totally wild and technocratic about it, in that like some case managers prefer to have paper, and that's okay. Like they can put their stuff on paper, and then when the client's not looking, they can put it in the computer. That's totally cool by us. I don't think that live data entry needs to be someone staring at an iPad while they should be giving someone real personal care. But I think what it needs to be is that when we have someone fill out a paper form and then give it to someone else to put it in the computer, we've doubled our chance that there will be an error through this game of telephone that we're playing. We've taken what could have been a very simple process and had to involve twice the amount of people that we actually needed. And it ends up costing a bunch of labor hours in data cleanup and in just unnecessary. I don't think that data entry people actually make our job easier, and we feel like they do sometimes. And I'm sorry, there might be a data entry person on the call right now. Email me. I apologize. But I do. That's been our big shift here. And we Petri dished it in one program. We opened a day shelter and we were like, we're going to try live data entry at just this day shelter. And then we were like, well, this works really well. Why haven't we been doing this the whole time? So we did another emergency shelter. Then we did street outreach. Then we committed to we're not opening any new programs that don't do live data entry. And it's just kind of spread from there, with PSH as this last stronghold fortress that we're going to crack one day.
That's interesting. I feel like permanent housing would be easier because there's less data entry because it's the same clients that are staying.
It would be way easier. It's the difficulty for us in permanent supportive housing is we are essentially 100% scattered site. There's a couple exceptions to that, but so our case managers are mobile, and they don't. The only computer they could access is at a kind of centralized office, but I say centralized really loosely because we have scattered sites all the way out to Rancho Santa Margarita, and the office is in San Clemente. So we don't want to just, honestly, we did the math, and having people waste their miles to drive back to the computer to do that, it's a hardware thing. We need to buy them tablets of their own, and we just haven't budgeted for it yet. So it's on our radar, but it's also the question, you're right, there's so little data entry that it's just been the program manager has been able to do all of the HMIS stuff, and we've used, I cringe to say this, paper files for case notes.
Oh boy. All right. Thanks for sharing, Connor. Sierra, did you want to add something?
Just really quick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just to add to that really quick, because I relate, Connor, and I understand the stress, but I'm also more in the situation that Cassie's in, where I came from Mercy House. I understand what it's like to not be able to particularly have that funding for everyone. Now being at Volunteers of America, all of our case managers, everybody has a laptop, everything is cloud-based, completely cloud-based. So for me, as an HMIS specialist, as the person that's entering that, we actually have a 4-step process. So what I'm saying, Connor, is I agree with you and feel you, but I also semi-disagree because our 4-step process really has decreased everyone's workload by having somebody basically manually input the HMIS, status update, we'll say in this case, right? So they're manually typing that in, uploading it to the cloud, having ABC review it, then it gets to me. I know all of the data is accurate. I'm not dealing with handwritten errors, who might have, spelled this wrong. And it really is just easier for me to have that, sign it, fill it all in, and the process is done. Print it, file it. So I'm actually really loving this change, but that's just me.
I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I'm sorry I ruffled some feathers.
Oh yeah, you got me. Just kidding.
But Sarah, you don't miss the piles and piles and piles of paperwork sitting on your desk?
Oh, don't you, Cassie? See, Cassie's my old boss. She used to pile those piles on me.
I never touched the paperwork.
Just let the pile grow.
Really quick last note, just since you said that, Cassie, that also speaks to, you know, we're going through COVID. How many less hands are touching the paperwork before it gets to me? I'm a germaphobe, so I love it. I love that I am the first hand it touches. I get to print everything, which is time consuming. I will admit that. Our files are a lot bigger though, but it's time consuming. At the same time, I feel safer about it. I'm filing it. It feels nice, you know?
Yeah, I agree. There's you know, it's very interesting going from one agency to another and just seeing the differences of like how things are done. The cloud-based situation is also a change for me. We do have a lot of data that we all have access to. We don't do anything like Sierra was just mentioning as far as HMIS data entry or anything, but you know, it is that's a very good option as well. I think I think you know, that sounds like a process that's working for you guys. So you know, maybe something for others to consider. I don't know.
Right, it's absolutely wonderful, but it also speaks to what we were talking about earlier. It's so fun. It's based on your agency. It's based on what funds are available to you. So
All right, thanks for sharing, Sierra. So it looks like comments on this one have slowed down a little bit, so I'm gonna keep going. So 5 of you said more than half or all of your projects are completing live data entry. So that's great. I'd love to see that number keep increasing. One of you said that your agency is using HMIS or data in a way that you think is unique. Does that person want to share? And then we'll tell you why you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I feel like it was you, Connor.
You know, it was me, but now that everyone's spoken, I don't feel too unique. I think I am amongst some really strong colleagues here, and that many of you are doing pretty much exactly what we're doing, and I admire that a lot. But you're still welcome to knock me down a peg if you'd like.
Just messing with you, Connor. You make it too easy.
You know, actually, that's not entirely true. I am quite proud of the equity dashboard that we made for internal use. It's really cool, and I haven't shown it to anybody, and haven't heard of anyone using something quite like it yet. And I've been to a few different conference sessions on similar tools that I used for inspiration, but deviated from. So I will say, I think that that's an exciting way that we're using HMIS here. Although I'm still confident that there's other people who are doing things that are equally exciting.
Connor, would you want to do a little presentation on your dashboard at a user meeting?
I would need to, just because of the sensitivity of some of the findings in it, I would need to like scramble the data to feel comfortable with doing that, or at least run it by the executive director first. But yeah, I would love to show it off. It's pretty nifty.
Okay. Ask Dawn and let me know.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. And if you haven't heard from me in a week or two, please email me because it means I forgot.
Okay. All right. And then our last poll question. Would you be interested in tracking whether clients have received the COVID-19 vaccine in HMIS? 7 of you said yes. And so I wanted to ask, what information would you want to collect around it? Is it just the dates that they received the vaccine? Is it which vaccine, the location they received it? What would you want to know?
I think just even a simple yes or no, and then, as far as if yes, then those dates, I think that'd be great, just to have that alone.
Okay,
Not sure if I'm versed enough in the science of the COVID vaccines and the varying things you have to do to make sure the full efficacy of them by the different manufacturers. But I think having that first vaccination date and that second vaccination date would be helpful, possibly as well as the manufacturer of the vaccine, depending on forthcoming revelations on their efficacy, whether or not a single dose is effective, and et cetera, going forward.
Connor, are you willing to do that data analysis on whether or not the vaccines are effective?
Yeah, do you want to make that spreadsheet?
I say we leave that to the professionals.
Okay, so it sounds like there is some interest in collecting the dates, potentially the manufacturer. Is there anything else that would be useful to collect? Anything, I don't know, related to like the spa that you received it in, or the city?
What are we doing with this information? It's not, I mean, I would love to gather it and have it, but like, really, what are we gonna do with it? And who are we gonna give this to? Like, do you think people are gonna ask for it, or is it just like useless information that we're collecting that nobody's ever gonna use? What do you think?
So that is part of the question is, I always say I don't want to collect something if we're not going to do anything with it. And maybe it's a little bit premature because I don't know if all of you have vaccination plans in place yet. But I was thinking at a minimum, it might be useful to the agencies if you are involved in the vaccination plan, knowing who has and hasn't gotten it. But like I said, it might be premature for that.
Yeah, I mean, and like the thought of like the safety of our clients and the safety maybe of our staff, it might be something useful to know when dealing with clients. But from what I understand, it's going to kind of be like a flu shot where it's like lessening the effects or the whatever, not effects, but the symptoms that you feel to make them less severe and not land you in the hospital, as opposed to actually like vaccinating you for life. I mean, I don't know even how effective knowing whether or not your client has had it is really going to help you much. Because, and I just like kind of fear like that, if they get vaccinated, like a lot of clients are not the most capable of doing follow-up things. So are they going to go and get their second? It's like, I feel like the data might be a little bit all over the place on who's going to be following up with those clients on whether or not they got them. And I'm just thinking about like our clients. We have so many people that we're in contact with. I don't just kind of like talking through this, I guess.
I
And
agree.
also like, I also kind of wonder, like, my head like always goes to like the discrimination of like homeless people, and like whether or not that would be something that we would be able to kind of see from tracking this.
I agree with Casey. I feel like it might be a little too early to track even, in the sense that we want to protect our clients in general. There are those that are for it, those that are against it, and we can't, the discrimination part of it, we don't want it to become a hindrance on that client, especially that they're already dealing with the homelessness. Now they have to deal with, you know, that we've all been dealing with COVID-19. And I feel like it is beneficial for those that are involved in the vaccination process of, you know, getting vaccinations out to those that are vulnerable and to the those that are exposed or at high risk of being exposed. It is good to, in that measure, but I feel like it is still a little too early. I feel like it's still going to be all over the place. And I think it just needs to settle first. Once they get down to that where they're doing general vaccinations to all of the public, then it's becomes like the vaccine for, you know, Hep B or Hep C. Have you had these? Or, you know, just the general flu shot. Did you get your flu shot this year? And I think that makes a difference in when and how we collect the data. All the points of collecting it does make sense. The 2 dates, where did they get it, and as well as which vaccine they received is important, but I feel like it's too early.
I
Okay,
think just from a program design perspective, this information might actually be helpful, not necessarily based on the science of the vaccine or whether or not it's effective or whether or not it's going to be like a Hep B vaccine or a flu shot, but rather just from a perspective of sheer compliance with ongoing recommendations and developments. It might be helpful to know, for instance, if we can increase capacities at shelters again based on dormitories of vaccinated versus non-vaccinated populations and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if anything will come of it. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball. None of us do, unless some of you are holding secrets. But I just feel that this removes a potential blind spot going forward when it comes to complying with COVID regulations. Of course, obvious safety protocols surrounding masks, social distancing, and whatnot. So I see this being useful just from that program design perspective, not necessarily from a perspective of what are we going to be reporting on this to funders and each other and that sort of thing.
okay, great. Go ahead, Connor.
Have you looked into it all, like what would and would not qualify? Like what information that we collect would qualify this as PHI?
So we haven't looked into the details yet, but we did hear that other COCs are thinking about collecting some of this information. So we wanted to start the conversation with this group. And most of the agencies are not HIPAA agencies and therefore don't have to worry about the HIPAA compliance. But yes, it's still very early.
Yeah, because I know just for schools to be able to collect immunization records, which I also understand is different than just someone self-disclosing that they have been immunized, but there's like that's specifically laid out in the Federal Register for them to be able to do that, to collect that information. So not trying to push back. I think it's worthy to collect. I would on this err personally on the side of caution, where I think the most I'd be comfortable with putting in HMIS is just a yes/no toggle. Like, has this person been immunized or not? I can't see a situation where we would ever need to record the 2 immunization dates or which brand it was. As exciting as that data may be decades from now, I just don't think we'd put it to good use, and I think it would be unnecessarily intrusive.
Have any of your agencies been involved in vaccination planning?
I know I don't have the details on it, but I know Illumination Foundation is working closely with the county since we are running the COVID facility, or one of the agencies that run a large portion of the COVID facilities. But I don't have the detailed, like I just know we're in communication with the county on vaccinations and the process of getting our staff and or our clients vaccinated.
Okay,
And I'm in the same boat with Jackie. I don't have any details yet. We're waiting for the program manager to hear back from HR, but I know that the VA is working towards getting something for their for the veterans, because they they qualify to be among the first issued. I don't know if we'll be included in that. So again, kind of same there with Jack.
Okay, and then last question to wrap this part of the meeting up. Did anyone want to share new challenges that you're facing due to COVID-19, or did we kind of already cover it?
I mean, we're just having a lot of staffing issues, honestly.
Is that new though?
No, I mean, throughout the entire year, we've just been having, but I think like, I mean, the uptick recently, it's really like, it's gotten bad within our agency again. You know, our shelter staff or in PTB staff or it's just, it's pretty rampant right now.
Yeah,
Stay home, guys.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. I feel like we got a lot of good information. But we have about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to switch now to the emergency shelter PPR unless anyone has any final thoughts they want to add. All right. All right, so now you should see the emergency shelter project performance scores for each project. So the reporting period for this report is November 1st, 2019 through October 31st, 2020. And this first page just shows for each of your projects how you're doing on each of the measures for emergency shelter. I won't dwell on this page too much because I want to get into the goals and outcomes, but just so you know, it is available if you haven't seen it yet. So I did want to spend some time on the goals and outcomes report. So this first screen or first page is looking at how emergency shelter projects as a whole are performing for each measure. I did want to add that for this project performance report, we did decide to exclude the FEMA and non-congregate shelter projects because they have such a limited focus, and we didn't want to appear to penalize those projects for that focus. So that data is not represented in these numbers. So you can see that we slightly improved as a COC on entries from homelessness, which is great. We're still a little bit under our threshold, but we are moving in the right direction. There was an increase in the length of stay in emergency shelter projects, and we kind of talked about that earlier. It is likely due to projects keeping clients rather than having them exit to unsafe situations in the past year due to COVID. The next measure is looking at unit utilization, which has decreased, which is also understandable due to projects allowing less clients into their projects due to COVID. Although we did give the agencies an opportunity to adjust their capacity, it's possible that not all the agencies did that because the utilization is lower. For goal 6, this is looking at adults that increased their income while enrolled in the project, and we had a big jump here, which is great. I wanted to give an opportunity in case anybody has any thoughts on how this happened. Since this is such a big jump, and that's a good thing, I'm wondering if anyone had any changes in process and how they're collecting this income information that they wanted to share. Nobody is unmuting, so I'm gonna keep going. For goal 7 is looking at adults that increase their income as of project exit. We had a slight increase, which is great. We're moving in the right direction. Goal 8 is looking at exits to successful housing situations, in this case, permanent housing. And we remain steady from the last time we ran these reports. We're a little bit under our goal though. And then the last measure is looking at returns to homelessness. So these clients are exiting emergency shelter projects to permanent housing. And then within 2 years of that exit, they are falling back into the homeless system. And this is another measure that we're usually pretty good at for each of the projects. And I did want to get feedback from the group on if we should decrease our threshold to 10% instead of 15, because emergency shelters have been able to hit this threshold consistently. Nobody has any thoughts?
Things can't get any worse. Just go ahead.
There's that optimism.
I know you miss me.
Is anyone opposed to decreasing the threshold?
I'd like to see it stay where it is, but I may be a biased opinion considering how we performed in this one this year.
I would
Actually,
say, oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna make a side comment. Go.
I'm sorry, Cass. All right. So I would say that leaving it where it is probably in our ultimate collective best interest, especially as we see it kind of just bumping up against that margin. I'm not sure, especially with the housing instability we're going to see in the coming months with the eviction moratoriums being lifted, if that's really something that's going to hold and be in our best interest. We might be setting holding ourselves to a standard that is going to set us up for failure. So I just want to be mindful of what the housing situation overall for everyone is going to look like in the coming months.
Okay. All right, we can keep it where it is for now, with the intent that we will discuss it again the next time we do these reports for emergency shelter, which will be in 6 months. All right, so doing a little bit of a deeper dive into each of the measures. So the first goal is looking at entries from homelessness, like I mentioned before. And you can see for the project type as a whole how we're doing, and then how we're doing for different subpopulations also. And the biggest standout is the households with only children over here. And the reason for that is almost all of those clients are in runaway homeless youth projects, which does not have a requirement to enter from homelessness. So that's why that percentage is low. And most of those entries are coming from friends and family. You can also see in our little chart here, for those enrollments for the whole project type that are not entering from homelessness, half of them are coming from friends and family, and then 33% are coming from institutional settings. Moving on to goal 2, this is looking at the length of stay in emergency shelter projects. So again, you can see how we're doing for the project type as a whole. We are a bit above our threshold, but that's actually not a bad score overall. And again, you can see households with only children is really short, again, to the nature of clients in those projects. You can also see the breakdown of length of stay for all the enrollments included in this measure, and over half are within that 30-day threshold, which is great also. We're moving in the right direction there. This next one is looking at unit utilization. We broke this one down by household type, and you can see households with children is remaining pretty high, and households without children has dipped down, and that makes sense because due to COVID restrictions, individual households need to be separated, right? So if you have a large shelter, you have to decrease your capacity to provide that social distancing, while families, they obviously don't have to social distance from each other. So it makes sense that their utilization remains high. And then here in our little chart, we also have the breakdown of projects by unit utilization. And about half of them are under that 65% threshold, again, due to decreased capacity. So really quick before we move on, as hopefully all of you know, the HIC and PIT are coming up very quickly. And if you haven't already adjusted your capacity for your emergency shelter due to COVID, please make sure you do that on your HIC so that we have your latest capacity information. Our next goal is looking at adults that increased their income while they were still enrolled in the project. And you can see it's pretty small universe of clients overall because they have to remain in the project for over a year. The good news is 65% of all the clients included in this measure maintained their income. And then another 16% increase. So that's a good majority of all the clients. And only 9% actually had a decrease. So that's good news. And then looking at those that had increased income as of project exit, again, 62% did maintain. And unfortunately, increase was pretty low, only 8%. And we did have a large percentage of unknown. And this could be due to clients exiting and, disappearing at exit. So you were unable to capture that income information. I also wanted to ask the group, for those of you that have emergency shelters with households, that serves households with children, if you have any thoughts on why this percentage is higher. So households with children had 29% of their clients, adults, that had increased income at exit compared to the other household types. Let's see, Jackie or Elizabeth. Who else serves families with emergency shelter? Yang? Anyone have thoughts? Everyone's bashful. Okay. Next measure is looking at clients that exited to successful housing situations. Again, households with children have a higher percentage of exits to housing situations than the other household types. I also wanted to mention, so kind of the reverse, I can tell you why the households without children is so low. Over 90% of the missing data here is for households without children. And that's likely due to a large percentage of the emergency shelter beds that are for households without children are night-by-night shelters, which means the clients aren't there every night during their project stay. They can come in one night, they'll be gone another night, they could come back the following night. And because of that format, a client could leave and not come back again, which is why this missing number is so high. So, and in turn is why households without children is low, and chronically homeless is also low because chronically homeless are usually households without children also. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, and then the reason that the households with only children is higher than everything else is again because they are RIE funded. A lot of them are exiting back to their families or friends wherever they were prior to enrolling in the project, because the project's kind of serving as like a reunification. So that is why their exits are so high. And then after the missing data, the highest number of exits to non-permanent housing situations is back to homelessness. So that could be that clients are exiting from one emergency shelter to another, or they could be exiting from emergency shelter to transitional housing. That would all fall into this category. And our final measure is looking at returns to homelessness. So exiting emergency shelter to permanent housing and then coming back to the homeless system. And it's pretty similar across the board. There's a little bit of variation, but there's nothing crazy across each of the different populations. When a client does exit to permanent housing and then later returns to homelessness, they're usually coming back to emergency shelter, followed by street outreach. So these clients are returning to literal homelessness. They're not going to like permanent housing or rapid rehousing usually. And then those that are exiting to permanent housing and later returning, that permanent housing exit is usually going to family or friends, and then followed by rent or own with or without subsidy and permanent supportive housing. So it could be that they're returning to their family and friends, and maybe they get in an argument and they have to leave, and then that's why they're returning to the homeless system. That could be an explanation of what's happening there. So that's all I had to share about the goals and outcomes. I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to either comment on any of the data or even about the report itself and the format. And then otherwise we will wrap it up. So I'll give everyone a minute to think.
The format is beautiful.
Thanks, friend. We added those ends at the bottom specifically for you, Connor, just so you know.
I think just overall, with the year that we've been given, I think throughout our homeless COC, everyone's been doing an amazing job at trying to keep to par with our thresholds. You know, we can only do so much. We know funding came through for extensions and a lot of clients that we didn't want to send out to bad situations and kept them longer. So it did affect some of our numbers. But I think overall as an agency or as a COC, we did pretty well at sustaining our numbers and staying within our thresholds. There's always room for improvement, and we can continue to create those partnerships as we were talking earlier. But you know, keep up the good work, everyone. And we all know it's hard out there still. So
Yeah, I agree, Jackie. It's been a tough year for a lot of people, but the data, I would say, is mostly not showing that, because everyone's continuing to work hard and do what needs to be done. So I agree. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Okay, so thank you all for attending and participating, particularly with the data discussion. We will post the meeting minutes as well as the recording and the reports from this meeting, and then we will send out a meeting reminder for the next meeting, which will be on the second Thursday of next month, which is February 11th. So thanks so much for attending, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
My friends.
Hi, friends.
Bye, y'all.